I'm 17. This story is a tale of revenge against my mom of all people. She took my phone away and revealed all my secrets, and when I had the chance to do the same, I used it. But now I feel ashamed because it didn't turn out how I expected it to at all. So when I turned 16, I met this group of people. They were mostly 17 and 18 years old, and they were awesome. They were going to parties all the time and doing wild things. Like, they would go to the forest in the middle of the night and launch some loud fireworks and then hide from the police who would come to investigate the loud noises. I don't know if it was true, but it seemed so exciting. And besides, the guy with the car in the group, Jonathan, was super cute. So imagine my excitement when I followed him on Insta and he followed me back. He started chatting with me and eventually invited me to hang out with his group. I had never been so excited in my whole life. Constant parties and hanging out in weird places, even exploring some abandoned buildings or just hanging out at someone's place. And I think Jonathan liked me. It didn't last for long though. My parents were busy people, constantly working, so I was relatively free and could do anything I wanted. But because for my whole life I never really went out much, and now I was suddenly always somewhere, my mom took notice. She asked me about it one morning, and I just kind of pretended that I was in a rush to go to school. So I said that I was hanging out with my friends and left. So one day she asked me to go take the clothing out of the washing machine. While I was doing that, she logged into my phone and looked through everything. And we had Instagram stories showing us partying, conversations discussing our plans, and us just playing jokes. So as soon as I finished with the clothing, I returned to my room and my mom was there, sitting on my bed with a stern look on her face, like she was ready to completely destroy me. After an hour of shouting, my dad came home and he just looked at us having an argument and left, not wanting to be a part of it. After this, my mom took everything from me. My phone, my laptop, everything. That wasn't even the worst part. She found out the phone numbers of my new friends' parents and told them everything. Some of the parents were alright with it because, most of them were 17, but the rest were grounded. Some of them even studied at the same school as me, and when I tried to talk with them, they ignored me and walked away. In their eyes, I was a snitch that ruined their carefree life, and I was devastated. I wasn't even allowed to see my old friends anymore, so I spent most of my days at home, bored, while my parents were out working or having fun somewhere. Great. But one day, I had a chance to take my revenge, and I really took it too far. Sometimes I would ask my mom to use her phone to watch YouTube videos or something. Once, while I was watching something, I accidentally checked her messenger and found something weird. She was having this chat with our mutual family friend, Mr. Carter. And guess what? It was clear as day that they were having an affair. I couldn't believe it. Mr. Carter had a wife, and sometimes they would come over to our place to have dinner and have nice chats with my father. Of course, my dad would never have noticed because he was always busy or didn't care that much. He was also away pretty often for weeks for work, so my mom had plenty of opportunities to meet with Mr. Carter. I couldn't believe that she would accuse me of having innocent fun while she was doing this behind my dad's back. I took screenshots of their conversations and emailed them to myself from my mom's email, because nobody really checks sent messages. I deleted all the screenshots, and when she came to take the phone away, I showed her the messages. We just looked at each other, not saying a word. And then she took her phone away and screamed at me that it's not okay to look through someone else's phone. I looked at her like, really? And it took her a few seconds to realize the irony of the situation. Anyway, she told me that my dad should not be told about this and that if I said anything, I would never see my friends or my phone ever again. It was a declaration of war. At first I thought about showing it to my father, but he was away. And I was really angry at my mom for ruining my last chance to have fun while I was in school. So instead of showing it to my father, I logged in from my school's computer and found Mrs. Carter's Facebook account. Oh yeah, I sent all of them to her without saying a word. Everything that happened next was just surreal. The next evening, Mrs. Carter came to our house and she and my mother were screaming at each other for what felt like hours. I stayed in my room, kind of scared of how mad my mom would be, but it got even worse when the screaming stopped. I peeked out from my room and saw my mom crying, trying to persuade Mrs. Carter to not tell my dad and that she felt ashamed. Mrs. Carter looked at her with disgust and said, "No, he will know everything. You ruined my life, so I will ruin yours." She left and my mom stood there for a while and then suddenly sat on the sofa. I came out expecting her to start screaming, but she wouldn't even look at me. Instead, she just sat there, like she was paralyzed, with tears running down her cheeks. She looked at me in the eyes and I felt extremely bad, even though she was the one who was cheating. After a while, she started talking. Dad hadn't been paying attention to her for years. He simply didn't care, and she would try to make it better to look more beautiful, but he just didn't care. She wanted attention. Mr. Carter promised her that they would get together after I graduated, so it wouldn't be as confusing. I started to realize how right she was. I'd never seen my dad talk with my mom about anything except the most mundane things like breakfast. He never looked at her and never even smiled at her. After a few days, I decided to help my mom, to encourage her to talk to Mr. Carter, because now nothing stood in their way. So she called him. He blamed her for ruining his marriage and causing his divorce, and that of course he didn't actually plan to leave his wife. So my mom was completely devastated. And then my dad returned home. We were ready for a conversation because he clearly knew, but instead, he just acted like nothing happened. He was his usual self for days. I found out what exactly happened much later. Dad didn't want a divorce because he was married to my mom for appearances. It was important for a man in his position to be married. But now he could be more open about all the affairs he'd had over the years, with many different women, and that he would just keep living with us and providing for us together with mom because it was just beneficial for everyone. What had I done? I didn't expect that at all. At least at this point I got my phone back, so I contacted my old friends, including Jonathan. At first they didn't want to talk with me, but I needed their help, so they finally listened. We met and I told them that I wanted to get revenge on my dad. They were the only ones who might agree to something like this. And besides, I explained to them that all of this was really my father's fault and my mom wasn't a bad person. So one day they arrived at my house, spray painted my father's car with nasty stuff, and quickly ran away. When Dad saw this, he was furious. He kept screaming and didn't even realize what happened because of course he didn't pay attention to my situation and didn't figure out that it was my friends. But my mom did, and she looked at me and smiled for the first time in a while. Later, my mom and I decided to take a trip to visit my grandma and grandpa, to have a relaxing week in their little village. We still hadn't talked about anything that happened, so the way there was mostly silent. But after a few days in the village, she asked me to take a walk in the forest. It was a little bit awkward at first, but then she asked if I would be willing to move in with her if she divorced my dad. She didn't want to take anything from him, like his house or anything, especially because he had better lawyers. Of course, my mom earned a good amount of money, but we wouldn't live as well as we did before. I happily agreed, and she hugged me for the first time in 6 months. On our last day in the village, Jonathan called me and told me that my father found out that it was them and that he wanted to sue them. Turns out, he asked around and one of our neighbors had cameras outside and recorded Jonathan's car and plate numbers. I was anxious that I ruined everything for them again, but my mom told me not to worry and that they should come and give the spray paint cans to her. And when we got home, Mom put on her best suit and beautiful makeup. When Dad returned from work, he started screaming because of the car. At this moment, my mom showed him the spray paint cans and calmly said, "Oh, I did that. Do you have a problem with it?" Can you imagine what would happen to my father's reputation if anyone found out that his own wife hated him so much that she spray painted his car? Yeah, he was red with anger but silent. I started laughing. My mom was smiling. It was great. After a few months, my parents finally got divorced and we started to live separately from my nasty father. My mom was so happy and full of life, and I finally realized how much alike we were. 2 really bad girls with an attitude. And guess what? Me and Jonathan got together. Just a week ago, he came to our place to finally properly meet my mom. Instead of his usual messy hair and baggy clothes, he had combed hair and wore a sweater, and he was super shy. Me and Mom were looking at each other, trying not to laugh at this adorable display. Everything is good now. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe to this channel.